Hosea chapter 1. Hosea chapter 1. It's a very interesting book for Hosea. More interestingly, a couple of things we have to do before we get into the book. One would be to understand the name itself. And the name of Hosea is actually Hosea. So it's pronounced as Hosea. The reason why we have Hosea instead of Hosea is because the Greek does not have a sh sound, the SH. So it only has the S. And most, if not all, our names in the English Bible comes from the Greek Old Testament instead of the Hebrew. And so we have the name Hosea. And Hosea comes from a word, Yasha. And Yasha means he saves, right? Hosea, Yasha. And Hosea gives us another name that we are familiar with, which is Yeshua. These are all related. Yeshua is our name when it gets into the Greek, becomes Jesus. And in the Old Testament, Yeshua in the long form is Yehoshua. And this is Joshua. And so all this Shea, Shua, Yasha, Yehoshua, everything has to do with salvation, right? To be saved. That would be our understanding, the deliverer. And so in this case, we have Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Yotam, Ahaz, and Yehizkiah. This is Yehizkiah. And this would be the Hebrew name for Hezekiah, Yehizkiah. And these were all kings of Judah. And then we have kings of Israel. And this time where Hosea was operating, it would be in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, right? Jeroboam, the son of Joash. And so that is the framework of chapter 1, verse 1. And we need to take a little bit of a historical view. So you remember that Hosea is in a period where there are the kings of Judah and there's a king of Israel, which is Jeroboam. We need to begin an understanding from the time of Solomon, right? Solomon. So we had Saul, then we had David, and then we had Solomon. Now, Solomon is the cause of this historical breakup, that at the end of his reign, the entire kingdom that was made up of 12 tribes split into two. So we have one here and two here. There are 10 tribes in the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is known as the house of Israel. Also, in short, called Israel. And so when you read about Israel, you need to know whether it refers to all 12 tribes or the northern kingdom, 10 tribes. It is likely to be the northern kingdom, 10 tribes, if the narrative is after Solomon. The capital of the house of Israel is Samaria. Now, the southern kingdom is called the house of Judah. And the reason why the house of Judah was kept was because God had a covenant with David called the Davidic covenant. In the Davidic covenant, God promised David that he will deal with the house of David very differently, with mercy, and the throne shall be forever. God will deal with the sins of his sons as a father to a child. Now, in the house of Judah, also called the kingdom of Judah or the nation of Judah, the capital of Judah would be in Jerusalem. That would be Jerusalem. Now, this would be the backdrop of Hosea. Hosea would be sometime here, okay? And I'll show you where it is. But this is important because we are talking about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And here would be the kings of Judah. And here we have the kings of Israel. And that is what we read in Hosea chapter 1, verse 1. Now, if we take a look at this bigger chart, you should be able to see Hosea here. And Hosea will have two items that we need to pay attention: the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. And so in Hosea 1 verse 1, we read of Uzziah, we read of Jotham, we read of Ahaz, and we read of Yehizkiah. So Hosea would be in this period of time. Okay, so it will cover, and then at this point in time, it would be Jeroboam, which is here. The rest here are all his sons and all little kings that is only there just for a year or two, very short period. But Jeroboam was the longest. So we read of this. So let me just blow up this picture. This is the picture that we can see, which is very important for us to understand that at the end of Hosea, a very important thing happened, which is the Assyrians taking over the northern kingdom. The house of Israel falls. Now, a number of years down the road, another 100 and maybe 100 over years, 100, 150 years down the road, then the house of Judah also falls to Babylon. So there is this entire collapse, but in the house of Judah, they came back after 70 years. So that is what we need to know. And Hosea is now writing with regards to his situation, with regards to the house of Israel, not the house of Judah, but the house of Israel, because Hosea is a prophet to the northern kingdom. So we're back in Hosea chapter 1 verse 1. We talk of Hosea, right? And God's word. Now this is all the time you read about prophets, you read about the word of the Lord that came to Hosea. And these are words that explains that it is God who is speaking to Hosea, and Hosea becomes a mouthpiece for God. And hence we call them prophet. And the words that they speak will come to pass because God is speaking through them. As we move on to verse 2, something interesting happens because God is now speaking by Hosea to Hosea or Hosea. And God had something very specific to instruct Hosea. He says, go, walk, right? Take this woman. Now, this is a very interesting woman. This is a woman who, well, I guess you can call it a harlot. That's what it uses, the word here, a harlot. A harlot is one who, well, how should we say? Prostitute, right? In our modern day. And God says, go and take yourself a wife. Get yourself married to a harlot. That is important for us to realize. And have children. That is another interesting thing. And this will become children of harlotry. For the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. Now, these are all very important things to talk about. The word harlotry are all here, okay? And God is using Hosea to teach Israel, or the land, the kings of Israel and the people of Israel, a lesson about how he is upset with harlotry. Now, in the human sense, harlotry would be a man having sex with a woman who is not his wife, right? Now that is in itself the definition of harlotry, and usually they are what we call the world's oldest profession. But harlotry, in the eyes of God, has a slightly different definition. Leaving God is harlotry. Going away from God is harlotry. And so God is actually not teaching Hosea. God is going to work through Hosea to teach Israel. And all these becomes a very physical action by Hosea, but those physical actions have symbolic meanings, right? Symbolic meanings. So God made this instruction: go marry a harlot and children of harlotry, right? That's basically what he says, what God says. Now in verse 3, he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, right? Diblaim, the daughter of Diblaim. This is Gomer. Gomer is, there are a number of Gomers in the Bible. Right? In Ezekiel chapter 38, we read of a Gomer. But this one is also Gomer. And Gomer means to come to an end. To come to an end. Now, all these are words that are going to be spoken of to Israel. And so when Hosea married Gomer, it is to tell Israel, that the northern kingdom, that they will come to an end. So you need to follow me with the names, right? They will come to an end. And then she conceived and bore a son. And then the Lord said to Hosea, right? Call his name Jezreel. Call his name Jezreel, which is Yitzrael. Yitzrael. It sounds like Israel, but it's not Israel, but it's Yitzrael. Uh, Unfortunately, it just sounds similar. And so God says that this is something that you need to do. You call this person this name. It says God will sow. And this is important because it speaks about God scattering seeds. God is going to plant something, right? It's God who's doing it. For a little while, and I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel, or the name is Yitzrael, Yitzrael, Yitzrael. So let me write this down. See how you can pronounce it. Yitzrael, right? Yitzrael. That's Jezreel, right? That's how we say it. On the house of Yehu. And this will be Yehu. The word Yehu means he is Jehovah. He is Jehovah. Now, all these names are peculiar, but it's talking about God revealing this plan through the life of Hosea in the marriage to Gomer, having the first son called Yitzrael, and there is a house of Yehu, and since Yehu means he is Jehovah, so the house of Yehu would mean the house of God. And bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Yitzrael, Jezreel. The valley of Jezreel is also what we call Megiddo. Okay, too many G's. Which we will get the end times Armageddon, right? The valley of Megiddo. That is also the valley where Elijah killed 450 prophets of Baal. So the valley of Jezreel is besides the mountain, and it's in a plain where it's really flat. So now we have a few names to remember. Gomer, to come to an end, because God will bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. There's a son by the name of Yitzrael, and so God is going to break the bow of Israel in the valley of this Yitzrael. Sounds the same, but God is it's like a rhyme. It's very poetic, right? Because of what Israel has done to the house of Yehu, which is the house of God. And in this case, you can immediately picture this, that God is very angry with the northern kingdom because of the things that they have done upon the servants of God. And so God says, I will bring an end to your kingdom, and that's it. There will be a major war and you'll be all wiped out. That is this story up to verse 5. Now we come to verse 6. Verse 6 speaks of a daughter. Gomer was pregnant again, and she bore a daughter. And God says, well, call her name this, Lo Ruhamah. Lo Ruhamah. Now the word lo for all intents and purposes, it means not. Means not. Okay. And the word ruhama means compassion. And this is important because God is using the daughter's name to explain to the house of Israel that God will no longer have mercy, no more compassion. And the word mercy here is compassion, right? This is raham, compassion, lo ruhama. And this word and this word is the same. And lo would be no mercy, no compassion to the house of Israel. And God then describes, I will utterly take them away. What does that mean? God will literally lift them off. And the word utterly take them away, is to surely lift them away. Lift them away means what? Literally to pluck them out and throw them away. That's basically what God is saying. Now I'm telling you that not only that I will avenge, that I'm going to sow this, I'm going to read this and throw it all away. Now verse 7, God responds slightly differently to Judah. But to Judah, God will have mercy on the house of Judah. And I will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses or horsemen. Right? God will not save them, but God will save by the power of God. And God will have mercy. But on the house of Israel, God will have no mercy. Okay? So far, I hope that you can follow up to verse 7. This is the daughter called Lo Ruhama. And the reason interesting is that the word compassion is a female name. And so the picture here would be Hosea now has a daughter, right? A daughter. Now in verse 8, as we go on, after Gomer had weaned Lo Ruhama, she conceived again and then bore a son. And God said to him, you call his name Lo Ami. Now you may think that they are the family of the Lo's, right? Lo Ruhama, Lo Ami. Well, basically the word Lo means no or not. Ami means my people. So in a name called Lo Ami means you are not my people. Now this is a very serious thing. It is God disowning Israel. And not only that you are not my people, I will not be your God. So there's an important relationship where we have God and then we have Israel. Not only that God has said that you are not my people, God has said, I'm not going to be your God. We're not going to have a relationship. And that is the story of Hosea marrying Gomer, having 3 children. A boy, a girl, and another boy. But the final one is important. I just want you to remember, Lo Ami, you are not my people and I will not be your God. What basically this means is that God is now saying that I'm going to pluck you up, throw you away, and I'm going to disown you. I don't want to know you. I don't want you to be my people, and I don't want to be your God. So don't look for me. And that in itself tells us that this is a very serious judgment that God has pronounced on the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom. All right? However, you all must remember, God will not forget his people. Although God is upset and is going to predict the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, and eventually we will see the Assyrians will come in to overtake them, yet one day they will be restored. So in verse 10 and 11, after you've been taken away, plucked out, surely lifted up and thrown away, that God says, you're not my people and I'm not your God. One day, the children of Israel, this would be the house of Israel. Right? This is not the 12 tribes. This is the 10 tribes. All of them will be numbered as the sand of the sea. That's a lot of people which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. There it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. You are not my people, you're sons of the living God. These two negate each other. So what basically God is saying is this. Today, this is what's going to happen. Tomorrow, this is what you're going to happen. That God is going to bring you back and call you sons of the living God. Now this is important. Sons of the living God, or sons of the God who is alive, and we see this word living God quite a lot of times in the Bible, because Jehovah God is different from all other gods because he is alive. And so we read of him as the living God. And God says, all of you, house of Israel, you will come back to me as sons, that you will belong to me. Where I had originally said, you are not my people, you are now my people. Not only my people or my nation, you are my children. Now that is a prophecy. The reason why I say it's prophecy is we know, number one, that whatever happened to the first son, the first daughter, and the second son all took place. And the house of Israel were completely removed, thrown all over the place into the Aramean territory. Some of them ran away to northern Africa, and they're all over the place. And we don't know who they are. That is the problem we have today. Hence, we have this the proposition that people say, well, there are 10 lost tribes of Israel. Now, I don't think they are lost. They probably won't know who they are. But one day, God will send someone to recover them. And they will come back as this. So many as the sand of the sea that cannot be numbered. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel, and see, this is important. The children of Israel is right here. The children of Judah will be the house of Judah. Remember, the southern kingdom. Both of them will be gathered together. And then they will appoint themselves one head. What does that mean? A king. And they shall come up out of the land. For great will be the day of Jezreel. And this will be taking place at Megiddo. And that's where popularly known as the Armageddon. And so that will be something that is going to happen, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel will come together one more time, and they will establish themselves a kingdom with a king. And this is the end times for the Old Testament. With regards to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom united together back in the land, having one king. And you know that king will come from the throne of David, from the Davidic covenant, that the throne of David will be forever. And so after David had stepped down from the throne, there will be someone in the future that will take over and sit on that throne. Now, along the way, you find that there were no kings after Judah had been captured and taken to Babylon. When he came back, there were no kings. But eventually a king arose that was appointed by Rome, and his name is King Herod. Now, King Herod is not an Israel king, although he is called King of Israel, but it is not recognized by God as a king of Israel, because a king of Israel must come from the Davidic line. And hence, Herod will never be counted. But by the way, Herod is actually an Idumean who is also from the house of Esau, an Idumean. But one day, this will happen. From you are not my people to you are sons of the living God. And both 12 tribes will come back together. And then there will be one king, one head, and the kingdom will have a king again. And all of this will result from something that's going to happen in Jezreel or Megiddo. This is the end of chapter 1.
Pastor.
Yes.
When this book was read out, okay, does the Israelite know what they are reading? Like the name, okay, which you mentioned, the meaning of the name.
I believe so. But I believe so. One of the things I didn't do, which I will do with you tomorrow, is that we should read 2 Kings 15. And you will see that the background of this, although they are told this information or the words of God spoken to Israel, Israel never listened. Never listened. And so when we go through the book of Hosea, you would see. But chapter 1 is important, because if you don't understand what's happening in chapter 1, then the rest of the chapters in Hosea will be lost. We will also want to deal with 2 Kings chapter 15 to know how all the kings, as we went along, what did they do? What was God's biggest problem with Israel? Idolatry. Idolatry in the eyes of God. Going after other gods. Although the king at times may be good, he did not destroy all the altars, and so the people kept worshipping other gods. And that really upset God. Now, all of this has to come from the 10 Commandments, remember? I'm the God who took you out of Israel. I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Israel, and I am the Lord your God is one. There shall be no other gods before me. That is coming to a head.
No
to a point where God says, "I tak boleh tahan lagi."
Okay, right.
These are the prophecies, and in hope that they would repent, which they didn't.
So, Pastor, that means verse 11 has not come true yet.
Correct. That's why I say it's a prophecy. 10 and 11 is future. Today, in the state of Israel, or what we call the country of Israel, they are Jews. And technically, the Jews are the house of Judah, made up mainly of Judah and Benjamin. And amongst them, you find Levites, because the temple was in Jerusalem. But Levites were all over the country. So Levites were also sent abroad, never came back. And so you only find that the final group of people who eventually came back after the Babylonian exile is the house of Judah. And so hence they are called Jews. Hence when we did the book of, what was that? Esther, we saw that Mordecai was a Benjamite, and he is a Jew.
So, Pastor, that means after Second World War, okay, when those Jewish people they punctually back to Israel, that means it's not the total number of people going back.
They are the house of Judah.
House of Judah only.
Yeah, which is Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Because Levi has been all over the land, but many of them were in the southern kingdom when King Nebuchadnezzar came after them. And so when he come back, so at the time of Jesus, it was only the Jews. Now there were some other tribes. And so when you read in, say, the Gospel of Luke, for example, you would find Anna, the prophetess, coming from the tribe of Asher. And so when you read in the New Testament, if they are not Jews, they will actually specify which tribe they come from. They don't want to be associated as a Jew.
Yeah, like Paul.
I think it's very much like Chinese, right? If you are
Hokkien, Chinese,
you don't want to be associated as Hokkien.
Oh, that means Paul is from the Benjamin group.
Correct. Paul is a Benjamin, like Mordecai.
Like Mordecai also.
Yes. King Saul is Benjamin.
King Saul also. Yeah.
Yes, King Saul is from Benjamin. Benjamin is the smallest tribe. And they had a king.
Okay. That means verse 11 is partially fulfilled.
No, it hasn't been fulfilled yet.
It's a future prophecy.
It's a future prophecy when both 12 tribes come back together. It will happen at Jezreel. You see here, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Something is going to happen at Megiddo, the plains of Jezreel.
And so there will be a king.
Yes, and that will be what they will call the Davidic Messiah.
Is that also what we regard as the second coming of Jesus?
Well, if you read this passage, you will find that the second coming of Jesus, as described in, say, Revelation 19, that is how they would try to overlap it. And if the Armageddon is this place called Megiddo, and so there will be in Revelation 19, it's a supernatural war that takes place, and did not specify the 12 tribes. Right? Did not specify the 12 tribes. But you can see in Revelation 7, and we will take a look at it tomorrow. These verses are there.
But the 144,000 was mentioned in the book of Revelation.
Before the 144,000.
Oh, before.
Yeah. So one of the things that you find is, you are not my people, I am not your God, is only spoken once just now. Right? In verse 9. Right? But in verse 10 and 11 will be the future return of the 12 tribes under one king. So the Jews, right now the Jews, right? They look forward to that king.
Actually, Pastor, before the dispersal, this was some sort of like a warning, isn't it?
Yes. Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So
all right.
Immediately after Hosea is the
last prophet to the northern kingdom.
Okay.
最後嘅先知啊。
Because after this, the Assyrians will come.
And most of them were taken away.
In fact, almost all of them were taken away, then the Assyrians brought Assyrian people into the northern kingdom, and then they intermarry with the Israelites. Then some of the Israelites also left and went to northern Africa. Right? There's a lot of movement of the house of Israel, and some of them actually went to the southern kingdom, to Judah, to seek refuge.
Some became polluted.
So it became very, well, very messy.
Yeah.
Now, how will the future know who the children of Israel is? I think this king, or whoever the king or the Messiah will be able to bring them all back.
Actually, at first by reading this, I thought it was the gospel time of Jesus.
No. Yeah.
No, it was much more further down.
This is way before the Babylonian. This is before the Assyrians. But at the tail end of the house of Israel, before God took them away. So if you remember, we read this here. Lo Ruhamah. Right? Lo Ruhamah. I will utterly take them away. The word utterly take them away is actually surely lift.
For sure.
Lift off.
Lift off. That means
Pluck
banish once and for all.
And throw them away.
That means one and for all, Pastor.
Correct. So they will not come back to the land. They will not come back. You see here, they are not going to leave the land voluntarily. God will bring in the Assyrians to pluck them away and remove them. Now, this is very interesting because you see the Assyrian Empire was an empire which is very different from the rest of the world empire. They come and then they displace the local people to a foreign land, and then they bring their own people to stay in the new land. And one of the reasons why the Jews don't like the northern kingdom result was that they became the Samaritans. The Samaritans, sorry. The Samaritans. Not Samaritans, the Samaritans. And they hate them.
Because they're half.
They're not pure.
Half lah.
Half or even some who are not, right? So they are mixed or not, and they worship Jehovah as one of the idols. Okay?
Very interesting, this book.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Pastor.
Okay, bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.